Early modern humans in Europe, known as Cro-Magnons or European early modern humans, were the first Homo sapiens to permanently inhabit the continent, arriving from Western Asia. They are thought to have settled as early as 56,800 years ago, where they coexisted and interbred with the native Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, who became extinct between 40,000 and 35,000 years ago. The earliest modern human arrivals in Europe, during the Initial Upper Paleolithic, did not leave any genetic trace in today's populations. However, a second migration wave around 37,000 years ago gave rise to a single founding population, from which all subsequent Cro-Magnons emerged, contributing to the ancestry of contemporary Europeans. Cro-Magnons are associated with Upper Paleolithic cultures, starting with the Aurignacian, which was later replaced by the Gravettian around 30,000 years ago. The Gravettian culture split into the Epigravettian in the east and the Solutrean in the west as a result of the harsh conditions during the last glacial maximum, peaking 21,000 years ago. As the ice sheets retreated, the Solutrean culture transitioned into the Magdalenian around 20,000 years ago, marking a period of recolonization in Europe. As large game began to die out and the last glacial period ended, the Magdalenian and Epigravettian cultures gave way to Mesolithic societies. In terms of anatomy, Cro-Magnons bore close resemblance to modern populations in Europe, West Asia, and North Africa, but were more robust, with larger brains, broader faces, pronounced brow ridges, and larger teeth. Some of the earliest Cro-Magnon remains also display features reminiscent of Neanderthals. Initially, Cro-Magnons would have had darker skin, as the genetic shift towards lighter skin tones began around 30,000 years ago. Their populations were sparse before the LGM, but they were tall, had far-reaching trade networks up to 900 kilometers, and hunted large game. Compared to Neanderthals, Cro-Magnons likely had larger populations due to higher fertility rates, although both species rarely lived beyond 40 years. After the LGM, their population density grew, and they began relying more on smaller animals and aquatic resources, using game drives to capture entire herds for food. The Cro-Magnon toolkit included spears, harpoons, spear throwers, and possibly throwing sticks and early domesticated dogs. They built temporary shelters while on the move, and the Gravettian people constructed large mammoth bone huts on the East European plain. Cro-Magnons are celebrated for their rich artistic legacy, which includes cave paintings, Venus figurines, animal carvings, and various geometric designs. They adorned themselves with beaded jewelry and wore dyed, plant fiber clothing. Their musical instruments included bone flutes, whistles, and possibly drums, bull roarers, and other percussion instruments. They practiced burial rituals, likely reserved for individuals of high status. The term Cro-Magnon originated from 5 skeletons discovered in 1868 by French paleontologist Louis Lartet in the Cro-Magnon rock shelter in Les Izes, Dordogne, France. These remains, initially viewed through a creationist lens as evidence of a pre-flood population, were reinterpreted with the rise of evolutionary theory in the late 19th century. In the past, Cro-Magnons were misrepresented through the lens of scientific racism and were associated with racial theories like Nordicism. These views were dismissed by the mid-20th century. During the first wave of feminism, the Venus figurines were seen as evidence of ancient matriarchal religions, though this theory lost support by the 1970s. When early modern humans, Homo sapiens, entered Europe, they encountered the native Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, who had been present on the continent for hundreds of thousands of years. In 2019, Greek paleoanthropologist Katerina Harvati and her team suggested that 2 skulls, dated to 210,000 years ago from a Pitama cave in Greece, represented early modern humans rather than Neanderthals, hinting at a much earlier human presence in Europe. However, this claim was challenged in 2020 by French paleoanthropologist Marie-Antoinette de Lumley and her colleagues. Around 60,000 years ago, during the marine isotope stage 3, Europe experienced fluctuating climates, which caused shifts in vegetation, alternating between forests and steppes. Evidence of the earliest modern human migration into Europe comes from a set of human teeth and Neronian stone tools found in Mandrin Cave, France, dating to 56,800 to 51,700 years ago. The Neronian culture is one of several industries that bridge the Middle and Upper Paleolithic periods. Following this, the Balkan-Bohunician industry appeared around 48,000 years ago, likely influenced by the Levantine Emiran culture. Other early human fossils, such as those from Rani's cave in Germany, are dated to approximately 47,500 years ago, while remains from Bulgaria, Italy, and Britain date to roughly 44,000 years ago. It remains unclear whether these early humans traveled through the Danube Valley or along the Mediterranean coast as they migrated westward. The Proto-Aurignacian culture, recognized as one of the earliest widespread Upper Paleolithic cultures in Europe, emerged around 45,000 years ago, possibly stemming from the Near Eastern Amerindian culture. This Aurignacian industry spread rapidly across Europe, replacing the Neanderthals and their Mysterian tool traditions. Aurignacian sites became more common after 35,000 years ago, especially in the Danube Valley, and the culture persisted until about 29,000 years ago. The eventual transition from the Aurignacian to the Gravettian culture is poorly understood, and it's debated whether the Gravettian evolved from local European cultures or was introduced from the Near East or Caucasus. However, genetic evidence shows that not all Aurignacian populations disappeared completely. The Gravettian culture, which appeared around 37,000 years ago, coincided with a significant drop in temperature. The culture may have originated in Central Europe or Crimea. Around this time, a founder population of modern humans emerged in Europe, marking the beginning of 23,000 years of genetic isolation from the rest of the world. As the last glacial maximum began around 29,000 years ago, Europe's climate became harsher, with glaciers covering large parts of northern Europe and much of the continent turning into polar desert or steppe. Two distinct cultures adapted to these conditions: the Solutrean in southwestern Europe, which developed new tools and techniques, and the Epigravettian in the east, which adapted existing Gravettian technologies. These peoples settled in various parts of the frozen landscape, with relatively few archaeological sites known from this time. The glaciers began to recede around 20,000 years ago, leading to the rise of the Magdalenian culture, which spread across Western and Central Europe. This culture persisted until around 14,000 years ago, when new traditions, such as the Azilian, Hamburgian, and Creswellian, emerged. During the Balling-Allerod warming, Near Eastern genetic markers began to appear in the European gene pool, indicating the end of Europe's genetic isolation. With the decline of large game animals, the Magdalenian and Epigravettian cultures gave way to Mesolithic hunter-gatherer societies as the Holocene began. As Europe warmed during the Holocene climatic optimum, which lasted from 9,000 to 5,000 years ago, the continent was repopulated. Western hunter-gatherers contributed significantly to the modern European gene pool, alongside ancient North Eurasians and Caucasus hunter-gatherers. Western hunter-gatherers' ancestry is present in today's Europeans, making up 40 to 60% of their genetic makeup, with Mesolithic figures like the Loshbor man from 8,000 years ago showing a similar genetic composition. As Neolithic farmers from the Near East began migrating into Europe around 8,000 years ago, they introduced agriculture and the early European farmer lineage, which now accounts for up to 90% of Mediterranean population's ancestry. Additionally, Eastern hunter-gatherers from the steppes contributed to the gene pool, particularly in northern Europe. The migration of the Amnea and Cordid-ware cultures from the steppes around 4,500 years ago brought the Bronze Age, Proto-Indo-European languages, and helped shape the genetic landscape of modern Europeans. In 1863, a railway was constructed leading to Les Izes, a hamlet in southwestern France. During the expansion of this railway in 1868, workers stumbled upon a rock shelter in the Vizier River Valley, unearthing stone tools, animal bones, and human remains. François Berthomiro, the contractor overseeing the project, halted the work and alerted authorities. Abel Lagan, a local geologist, further examined the site, while Louis Lartet, under instructions from the French government, conducted a more thorough excavation. He presented his findings at the Society of Anthropology of Paris in May 1868, identifying the site as a Paleolithic burial ground and attributing the remains to prehistoric cave dwellers. The site, now known as Abri de Cro-Magnon, is recognized as a significant discovery and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Cro-Magnon rock shelter became the type site for early modern humans in Europe, named after the landowner Magnon. Initially, Lartet identified 5 individuals, 3 males, 1 female, and 1 infant. Later studies suggested there were at least 8 individuals based on over 140 bones. This discovery, alongside others like the Red Lady of Paviland in Wales, which was incorrectly thought to be a Roman woman but is now known as a Paleolithic man, challenged previous interpretations of prehistoric human life. Initially, these finds were viewed through a creationist lens, but the rise of evolutionary theory, especially after Darwin's On the Origin of Species, 1859, began to reshape perspectives. In the wake of these discoveries, early anthropologists attempted to classify fossil humans, including Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals, often using pseudoscientific methods such as anthropometry, physiognomy, and phrenology. These efforts were deeply entwined with 19th-century racial theories, which divided humans into subspecies based on physical characteristics. For instance, Lartet initially classified Cro-Magnons as Homo sapiens fossilis, but others proposed various classifications, influenced by prevailing racist ideologies that sought to create hierarchies among human populations. These ideas culminated in the Nordicist theories of the early 20th century, which posited that taller Cro-Magnon specimens were the ancestors of the so-called Nordic race, while shorter specimens were linked to other groups, like the Mediterranean or Eskimoid races. By the 1940s, in the aftermath of World War II and the discrediting of racist ideologies associated with Nazi Germany, the pseudoscientific study of human races, or raciology, fell out of favor. The positivist movement, which aimed to remove political and cultural biases from scientific inquiry, played a key role in the rejection of such classifications. The Upper Paleolithic period, which coincided with the appearance of modern humans like Cro-Magnon in Europe, is thought to have been marked by a significant population increase, possibly due to higher fertility rates. Studies indicate that most Paleolithic humans, both Neanderthals and modern Homo sapiens, did not live beyond the age of 40. Estimates suggest that the population of Europe grew steadily over time, from roughly 1,700 to 28,400 people around 40,000 to 30,000 years ago, to between 11,300 and 72,600 by 16,500 to 11,500 years ago, after the last glacial maximum. This increase in population density may have been accompanied by reduced mobility and signs of nutritional stress. The Cro-Magnons, anatomically modern humans from the Upper Paleolithic period, shared many physical traits with present-day humans, but also displayed unique features that hinted at their evolutionary background. They had a globular braincase, flat face, gracile brow ridge, and a defined chin, but their bones were more robust. Early Cro-Magnons, particularly Aurignacians, exhibited features reminiscent of Neanderthals, such as slightly flattened skullcaps and occipital buns, which diminished over time and were likely remnants of Neanderthal introgression that were eventually bred out of the gene pool. On average, Cro-Magnons had larger brains than modern humans, with volumes estimated at around 1,514 cubic centimeters compared to today's average of 1,350 cubic centimeters. While this does not necessarily indicate higher intelligence, the differences in brain structure, particularly in the frontal and occipital lobes, suggest potential functional distinctions. In terms of stature, early Cro-Magnon men and women were estimated to have been quite tall, with men averaging 176.2 centimeters and women 162.9 centimeters, similar to modern Northern Europeans. After the last glacial maximum, their average height decreased, likely due to environmental changes affecting diet and mobility. Despite living in cold climates, their earlier tall stature contrasts with Allen's rule, which typically associates cold climate adaptations with shorter bodies. Genetic evidence has revolutionized our understanding of Cro-Magnon ancestry and their relation to modern humans. Early studies found Cro-Magnons to be closely related to present-day Europeans, although their genetic composition varied across time and populations. They carried Y-DNA haplogroups such as C1, IJ, and K2A, and mtDNA haplogroups N, R, and U, with haplogroup I and U5 being prominent in Europe during and after the last glacial maximum. Although early theories assumed that Cro-Magnons were light-skinned due to their European geography, genetic studies show that many of the genes associated with lighter skin, hair, and eyes in present-day Europeans underwent positive selection later in the Mesolithic, suggesting that Cro-Magnons likely had darker skin and features. Genetic evidence also indicates that they interbred with Neanderthals, with Neanderthal DNA entering the human genome around 65,000 to 47,000 years ago. However, these genes appear to have been selected out over time, as they may have been maladaptive. Cro-Magnons, along with other early European populations, were part of a dynamic history of migrations and genetic admixture. Studies show that Europe was populated by distinct lineages, with earlier inhabitants, such as those represented by the Bacho-Quiro sample, 45,000 years ago, having closer genetic ties to modern East Asians and Australasians. These populations were later replaced by a Western Eurasian lineage, which expanded into Europe around 40,000 years ago. The complex history of these migrations and genetic shifts culminated in the formation of modern European populations, with Cro-Magnons contributing significantly to this genetic legacy. The transition from the Middle to Upper Paleolithic, marked by the replacement of Neanderthals with Cro-Magnons, coincided with a notable increase in technological and cultural complexity. This period, referred to as the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, is associated with the emergence of behavioral modernity, a term that encompasses advanced tool-making techniques, symbolic art, and social structures. Technologies like microlith production, the use of bone and antler tools, grinding and pounding tools, and the development of body decoration, figurines, and long-distance trade networks all signify the Cro-Magnons' advanced capabilities. The Magdalenian culture, in particular, produced highly intricate art and decorated everyday objects. In subsistence strategies, Cro-Magnon societies, like many hunter-gatherers, exhibited a sexual division of labor. Traditionally, this was portrayed as men focusing on hunting large game, but this perspective has evolved with the recognition of the vital role women played as gatherers, providing a more reliable food source through plant collection and small game hunting. This shift in understanding, popularized by figures like Betty Meehan, emphasizes a more balanced view of male and female contributions to Cro-Magnon societies. Cro-Magnons were skilled hunters who likely studied prey habits and migration patterns. For instance, reindeer, horses, and ibex congregated seasonally, and Cro-Magnons adapted their hunting strategies accordingly. They are believed to have followed reindeer herds, especially in southwestern France, where reindeer were a key resource. After the last glacial maximum, they employed game drive systems, using natural barriers like cliffs and water bodies to trap and kill large numbers of prey. These mass kills were likely scheduled to align with seasonal migrations of red deer, horses, reindeer, and other large mammals. The diet of Cro-Magnons evolved over time, especially after the LGM when big game became scarcer due to environmental changes and human hunting pressure. This led to a broader reliance on small animals, fish, and plants, especially among Magdalenian peoples. As megafauna like woolly mammoths and rhinoceroses became extinct during the Quaternary extinction event, post-LGM communities suffered from nutrient deficiencies and a reduction in stature, indicating that they had to consume less desirable food sources to survive. In contrast, epigravidian groups focused on hunting single species like horses or bison, reflecting regional differences in subsistence strategies. The rapid decline in Europe's megafauna, possibly hastened by both environmental shifts and human activity, marked a significant change in the landscape and available resources, contributing to the broader extinction of these species by the Holocene. Cro-Magnons crafted spear points primarily from bone and antler, materials less prone to shattering than stone. Over time, spearheads evolved in shape, and the spear thrower was introduced to increase projectile accuracy. Stone spearheads and possible archery appeared in the Solutrean era, while harpoons became more common in the Magdalenian. In society, early models proposed matriarchy, with women's power later overtaken by men. The interpretation of Venus figurines fueled debates over gender roles, but later archaeologists leaned away from speculative theories. Cro-Magnon art, trade, and symbolic use of materials like red ochre indicate cultural complexity, while cave art suggests shamanistic practices. Proto-dogs were domesticated for hunting and protection, with early examples suggesting emotional ties between humans and animals. Their vocal anatomy suggests they were capable of speech, though the origins of language remain debated. During the Upper Paleolithic era, Cro-Magnon hunters crafted various tools and weapons from materials readily available in their environment. Bone and antler were commonly used for spear points, primarily because these materials were more durable and less prone to shattering than stone. These points were attached to wooden shafts to create javelins. Some evidence suggests that these early craftsmen may have experimented with adding bone barbs to their weapons, though the widespread use of this technology seems to have emerged later, around 23,500 years ago, becoming more common in the Mesolithic period. Aurignacian spearheads evolved over time, starting with lozenge-shaped, diamond-like designs. By 30,000 years ago, a more rounded base was introduced, and spindle-shaped heads appeared around 28,000 years ago. During the Gravettian era, spearheads with beveled bases became prevalent, and the invention of the spear thrower in Europe significantly increased the accuracy and force of projectiles. One of the oldest potential examples of a boomerang, crafted from mammoth tusk, dates to about 23,000 years ago in Poland. However, whether it was capable of returning to its thrower remains uncertain. In the Solutrean period, stone spearheads with leaf-shaped and shouldered designs became more common, and smaller spearheads may have been used as projectile darts. While archery may have emerged during this time, definitive evidence of bows doesn't appear until the Mesolithic. The Magdalenian era saw advancements in bone technology, with an increased use of long-range weapons and harpoons. Some fragments suggest the use of multi-pronged harpoons, possibly for fishing along seasonal migration routes. The idea of prehistoric matriarchal or matrifocal societies, where women held central roles, gained attention in the 19th century when legal scholar Johann Jacob Bachhofen proposed a theory of early human societies being matrilineal. His hypothesis suggested that in ancient times, monogamy was not widespread, making it easier to trace lineage through women rather than men. This led to the notion of early matriarchal societies being overthrown by patriarchal systems as civilization progressed. Such theories were later adapted by prominent thinkers like Friedrich Engels, who argued that economic shifts led to the subjugation of women, a situation that could only be reversed with the adoption of communism. The discovery of Paleolithic Venus figurines, often depicting exaggerated female features such as prominent breasts and buttocks, fueled early theories about female fertility and goddess worship. These statues were sometimes seen as evidence of a matriarchal society, though the interpretation of the figurines has shifted over time. While some early archaeologists viewed them as pornographic or made by men for men, later scholars posited that they may have been symbolic representations of fertility or motherhood. By the mid-20th century, many scholars viewed these figurines as evidence of a prehistoric fertility cult. However, this notion has been contested. Scholars like Cynthia Eller, in her book The Myth of Matriarchal Prehistory, have challenged the idea of a widespread prehistoric matriarchal society, suggesting that such interpretations are speculative and unsupported by sufficient evidence. The Upper Paleolithic period is notable for evidence of extensive trade routes and interactions across vast distances. The communities, particularly in the Gravettian era, were highly mobile, and materials sourced from over 200 kilometers away have been found in archaeological sites in Italy and Moravia. This suggests that these early humans maintained long-distance connections, possibly as a survival strategy in response to a harsh and changing climate. Artifacts such as Venus figurines and specific burial practices were spread over wide geographical areas, indicating shared cultural practices across Europe. However, genetic studies suggest that while cultural ideas may have spread between European and Siberian populations, there was little interbreeding, indicating the movement of ideas rather than people. As the last glacial maximum, LGM, progressed and land became less habitable, populations may have become more localized, with regional economies emerging. The increased population density in habitable areas likely reduced the need for long-distance travel, a trend that continued into the Mesolithic as societies became more sedentary. Even during this period of regionalization, evidence of trade remained. For example, remnants of a painting at Lascaux show traces of a rare manganese mineral, osmanite, which likely came from a source 250 kilometers away. Similarly, Mediterranean and Atlantic seashell jewelry, found far inland, suggests a continued exchange of goods over long distances. Cro-Magnons, who lived during this period, were highly mobile and adapted to various environments. Evidence suggests that they often returned to certain sites seasonally, where they constructed temporary shelters, likely supported by wooden frames and covered with animal skins or other materials. Hearths, designated sleeping areas, and spaces for butchering and other activities have been found in their campsites, indicating an organized approach to their living spaces. In the Magdalenian period, open-air sites and caves appear to have been used repeatedly over thousands of years. Some sites, like Père Blanc in France, were revisited for generations, possibly for hunting or other seasonal activities. Stone-lined rectangular foundations, interpreted as the bases of huts, have been discovered at several sites. In Pinsevent, France, archaeologists found evidence suggesting the presence of small circular dwellings with indoor hearths and workspaces. One of the most intriguing aspects of Upper Paleolithic life is the domestication of dogs. DNA evidence suggests that the domestication of dogs from wolves began around the time of the LGM, though earlier remains, such as the 36,000-year-old Goyet dog from Belgium, indicate multiple attempts at domestication. These early proto-dogs varied in size and are identified by their shorter snouts and broader brain cases compared to wolves. At the Předmostí site in the Czech Republic, 3 dogs were found with their skulls perforated, likely as part of a ritual, and one had a mammoth bone in its mouth, suggesting a symbolic relationship between humans and dogs. By 14,500 years ago, the bond between humans and dogs had become deeply emotional, as evidenced by a dog buried with 2 humans at the Bonn-Oberkassel site in Germany. Though the precise role of these early dogs is unclear, they likely assisted in hunting and guarding, and their domestication represents one of the earliest examples of human-animal cooperation. The discovery of Paleolithic art in the form of cave paintings and engravings has transformed our understanding of these early humans. Initially dismissed as art for art's sake by 19th-century archaeologists, these works are now seen as highly symbolic. Paintings found in deep, hard-to-reach caves, such as Altamira in Spain, suggest that art played a significant role in Upper Paleolithic life, possibly connected to ritual or spiritual practices. Cro-Magnons used natural pigments, especially red ochre, which was likely applied to the body or used in burials for symbolic purposes. Ochre had to be imported over long distances, further emphasizing its importance. While its exact purpose remains unclear, it may have been used for cosmetic, medicinal, or even adhesive purposes. In the Magdalenian period, bipointed needles may have been used for tattooing, and some depictions of male figures from this time show evidence of tattoos, scarification, or piercings, suggesting body modification was an integral part of their culture.